Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we're diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is the Secret Doctrine. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but some people seem to find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material, so that you can understand who I am and why I say the things that I do. Of particular note again today is almost certainly going to be the Infinite Integrations playlist, where I teach people how to do magic responsibly. With that being said, let us dive in and continue our exploration of the Secret Doctrine with Stanza 7. Behold, the beginning of sentient, formless life. And I want to point out that this is all speculation, right? From the top, so I don't have to keep saying it. Anything talking about the beginning is going to be speculation. You can believe it, right? I have my beliefs on creation. You can have your beliefs on creation. They can have their beliefs on creation. But it is a belief. It is not a fact. It is not something that we know for sure. It is something that we speculate upon. First, the divine vehicle. The one from the mother spirit, Atman, then the spiritual, Atma Buddhi, spirit soul. And we have a footnote, so we're going to go ahead and pop that out. This relates to the cosmic principles. C, again, the 3 from the 1, D, the 4 from the 1, E, and the 5, F, from which the 3, the 5, and the 7. These are the threefold and the fourfold downward. The mind-born sons of the First Lord, Avalokiteshvara, the Shining Seven, the Builders. We got another footnote, so let's pop that one out. The 7 creative rishis, now connected with the constellation of the Great Bear. That is new information. It is they who are thou, me, him, Olanu, they who watch over thee and thy mother, Bahumi, the earth. Now, the hierarchy of creative powers is divided into 7, or 4 and 3, esoteric, within the 12 great orders, recorded in the 12 signs of the zodiac. The 7 of the manifesting scale being connected, moreover, with the 7 planets. All this is subdivided into numberless groups of divine, spiritual, semi-spiritual, and ethereal beings. The chief hierarchies among these are hinted at in the great quaternary, or the 4 bodies and the 3 faculties, of Brahma exoterically, and the Panchayam, the 5 Brahmas, or the 5 Dhyani Buddhas in the Buddhist system. The highest group is composed of the divine flames, so-called, also spoken of as the fiery lions and the lions of life, whose esotericism is securely hidden in the zodiacal sign of Leo. It is the nucleo of the superior divine world. See commentary in the first pages of Addendum. They are the formless, fiery breaths, identical in one aspect with the upper sephirithical triad, which is placed by the Kabbalist in the archetypal world. The same hierarchy, with the same numbers, is found in the Japanese system in the beginnings, as taught by both the Shinto and Buddhist sects. In this system, anthropogenesis precedes cosmogenesis, as the divine merges into the human and creates midway into its descent into matter, the visible universe. The legendary personages remarks reverentially, "O moi," having to be understood as the stereotyped embodiment of the higher secret doctrine and its sublime truths. To state it at full length, however, would occupy too much of our space. But a few words on this old system cannot be out of place. The following is a short synopsis of this anthropo-cosmogenesis, and it shows how closely the most separated notions echoed one and the same archaic teaching. When all was yet chaos, Konton, 3 spiritual beings appeared on the stage of future creation. Ami no Ani Nakanushi no Kami, divine monarch of the central heaven. Takami Anosubi no Kami, exalted imperial divine offspring of heaven and the earth, and 3. Kamo mi mushubi no kami, offspring of the gods, simply. So this is the divine offspring, and then the offspring of the gods. So this is implying that the gods were the divine offspring of the divine monarch, right? These were without form or substance, or arupa triad, as neither the celestial nor the terrestrial substance had yet differentiated, nor had the essence of things been formed. In the Zohar, which as now arranged and edited by Moses de Leon, with the help of Syrian and Chaldean Christian Gnostics in the 12th century, and corrected and revised still later by many Christian hands, it is only a little less exoteric than the Bible itself. This divine vehicle no longer appears as it does in the Chaldean Book of Numbers. True enough, Ein Sof, the absolute endless no thing, uses also the form of the One, the manifested heavenly man, the first cause, as its chariot, Merkava in Hebrew, Vahan in Sanskrit, or vehicle to descend into and manifest through in the phenomenal world. But the Kabbalists neither make it plain how the Absolute can use anything or exercise any attribute whatsoever, since, as the Absolute, it is devoid of attributes. Nor do they explain that in reality it is the first cause, Plato's logos, the original and eternal idea that manifests through Adam Kadmon, the second logos, so to speak. In the Book of Numbers, it is explained that En, or Ein, Aor, is the only self-existent, whereas its depth, Bithos, or Buthon of the Gnostics, called Propator, is only periodical. The latter is Brahm as differentiated from Brahma, or Parabrahm. It is the depth, the source of light, or Propator, which is the unmanifested logos, or the abstract idea, and not Ein Sof, whose Re uses Adam Kadmon, or the manifested logos, the objective universe, male and female, as a chariot through which to manifest. But in the Zohar we read the following incongruity. Senior occultus est et abscondius. Microprospus manifestus est non manifestus. This is a fallacy, since microprospus, or the microcosm, can only exist during its manifestations and is destroyed during the Mahapralayas. Rosenroth's Kabbalah is no guide, but very often a puzzle, and that is because they do not know, right? It is quite frustrating for me, right? I am a seeker of knowledge. I have a little bit more knowledge than most other people. That is not to say that other people don't have the same type of knowledge, but most people don't know that these things are real. This whole speculation that is going on bears no weight. There is no reason to really dig in and fight about this or to keep reiterating this other than confusion, right? One who was 3, who became 4, and then 5, and then 7, and then 3, and then, like, that is just confusing. It serves no real purpose. I talk about numbers, right? I talk about 1. God is 1. All things are God. Every single particle in existence is God. The differentiation is in the Trinity, which is us, right? There is the body, which is the temple of God. There is the divine spark, which is you making the decisions. And there is the Holy Spirit, which is the one, right? So that is 1 into 3, okay? And then I talk about the 8, but again, that refers to us. We have 7 internal chakras and 1 external chakra. Now, what is being referred to as the Merkaba in here is what I call the divine chakra. It is exterior to you, but it is intrinsic to you. It is literally holding together the energies, right? You have 7 energetic centers within you that each govern a different part of you, right? The base governs your primary existence. The sacral governs your desire to create. The solar plexus governs the digestive tract and receiving nutrition. The heart holds together your lower and upper and helps you to express desires. Your throat is how you literally give voice to those desires. Your third eye is how you see those desires. The crown is where you receive your information from the divine. And the divine is the system that you use to govern or to transport yourself, right? The divine is quite literally the one you differentiated within. So 1, 3, and 8 I talk about all of the time. But there are reasons for it. There's really no reason for the 4. There's really not. I have not yet come across a point in the 4. The 7, I'll grant you the 7 because that is so intrinsic. But to me, the 7 always includes the 8. But then to go from the 7 back to the 5 and then back to, it's just confusing. Most of that is intentional. Most of these clubs want to confuse the issue as much as possible. The people who read the Kabbalah, right, the Zohar and things like that, they want to feel like they're special. And because they want to feel like they're special, they make this confusing terminology about things that they don't know, right? You can have a divine revelation. I have had a spiritual experience that I consider to be a divine revelation, but I don't propose it as fact, right? I talk about the 1, the 3, and the 8. Those are speculations. Those are things that I consider knowledge, but you may not. You can take it or leave it however you want to. These speculations that once upon a time this became differentiated and that became differentiated and that became differentiated, that's fine to speculate upon, but it is not a truth. That is something that's just annoying about this, right? This whole thing so far has really been about trying to reiterate 1, 3, 4, 7, 5 for no reason. This has been an awful lot of knowledge. There has been knowledge contained in this. We have talked about it, we've discussed it, but an awful lot of speculation couching the knowledge. The knowledge is there, but you have to understand it prior to getting to it in order to pull it out. That is annoying to me. It really is, right? To spend so much time on this speculation, it really is hard to continue, right? I was really hoping for some more meat, right? We talked about that when we went through Isis Unveiled, how there was really no meat in there. There was an awful lot of history. We learned a lot of things, but there was no meat of spirituality in that. There is no meat in this. There is no do this and this happens in this. And that's what I was really hoping for. And I'm going to continue the study. We're going to keep going through this. But it is extremely annoying that there is so much time spent on this and no time spent on the other parts of this. And that's annoying to me. I just had to point that out, right? Because Rosen thought Rosenroth's Kabbalah is no guide. That's intentional. As in the Javanese system, in the Egyptian, and every old cosmogony, at this divine flame, the one are lit in the 3 descending groups. Having their potential being in the higher group, they now become distinct and separate entities. These are called the virgins of life, the great illusion, etc., etc., and collectively the 6-pointed star. Now, I have already talked about the 6-pointed star and how that it actually represents 8, right? There's the initiating point, the 6 points around, right? That makes 7, and then 1 encompassing, that makes 8. That is a good representation of your internal and external chakras for reasons that we've already talked about before. All right. Again, I don't believe that this is an illusion. That doesn't mean that it is necessarily hardcore reality in the way that realists believe. I'm more of an idealist, although I'm more of a realist idealist, right? I believe that we are here, that we have rules to live by, and that you have decisions to make, but those decisions to make don't really shape reality in the way that other people want it to, right? You cannot just manifest $1 million and have it pop into your lap with no consequences, right? The actual idealists believe that. That is what led them into communism and socialism. I'm more of a realist in that we have rules that we have to play by. Sometimes we have bottlenecks that we cannot avoid, and sometimes we get more choice. If there is a bottleneck, such as a war is a good bottleneck. Everybody is affected by that in some way or another, and how you react to that is your part in the bottleneck. But the bottleneck is still there. You don't get to remove the bottleneck just because you want it to be gone. Those things are still going to happen. You will never achieve eternal life on the mortal plane. It is not going to happen. You can spend as much time researching and doing whatever experiments you want to. It's not going to happen for a reason, because you're not meant to be immortal on this plane. And so we have to learn that sometimes things are couched simply to keep them hidden. And while once upon a time that may have been a good thing, it is not anymore. The great illusion to me is the illusion. To say that, oh, well, it's all fake anyway. No, you are here. You are real. You can touch things. And you can be affected by things, whether or not you want to. That is reality. But you get to make decisions. You get to take from that situation the positive or the negative. That is making a decision. That is literally shaping your reality. And you get to pull possibilities into your life. That is a very real thing. I've healed myself. That was a possibility that I attuned to, right? It is not a immediate process. It is me aligning to the timeline in which I am in good health. That is, in small part, shaping reality, right? I do believe that you can shape it in small ways, but that if you are looking to completely overturn reality because it is an illusion, you are going to be severely disappointed. All right. The latter is the symbol in almost every religion of the Logos as the first emanation. It is that of Vishnu in India, the chakra or wheel, and the glyph of the tetragrammaton, the he of the 4 letters. 6 points in the star does not make 4. It does not in any way, shape, or form make 4. It does make 8. It does not make 4. He of the 4 letters, or metaphorically, the limbs of Microprosperos in the Kabbalah, which are 10 and 6 respectively. Right? It is a 6-pointed star. How do you get 10? Like, I explained how I got 8. Explain to me how you get 10 out of 6. The later Kabbalists, however, especially the Christian mystics, have played sad havoc with this magnificent symbol. Let's see this. Indeed, the Microprosperous, who is, philosophically speaking, quite distinct from the unmanifested eternal Logos, one with the Father, has been finally brought, by centuries of incessant efforts, of sophistry and paradoxes, to be considered as one with Jehovah, or the one living God, whereas Jehovah is no better than Bina, a female Sephiroth. This fact cannot be too frequently impressed upon the reader. Now, I do agree with that, right? The divine, the one, is beyond your names, right? But you can assign one. People have assigned Jehovah to that, but Jehovah had a whole different explanation at one point in time. Now, I believe in the entities, and I believe that Jehovah was probably one of the entities. I used to call upon that name quite frequently until I did the Bible study, right? We did the unconventional Bible study where we read aloud the Bible like we do here, and I discovered just how evil that particular entity was, right? He rewards nothing but bloodshed. Nothing but bloodshed and discord. That is all that Jehovah rewards. And he rewards it spectacularly. The more that you do bloodshed, the better off you are. Look at David. How did he wind up being the king? He cut off the foreskins of all of his enemies as a bridegroom gift. And then, all of a sudden, things happened in his life. He was a horrible person. David was a horrible person, and that is recorded in Kings and Chronicles. You should go back and read that if you are unsure of what I am talking about. All right. For the 10 limbs of the heavenly man are the 10 Sephiroth. But the first heavenly man is the unmanifested spirit of the universe, and ought never to be degraded into micro-prosperous, the lesser face or countenance, the prototype of man on the terrestrial plane. There's another footnote. The micro-prosperous is, as just said, the logos manifested, and of such there are many. Of this, however, later on. The six-pointed star refers to the six forces or powers of nature, the six planes, principles, etc., etc., all synthesized by the seventh, or the central part in the star. All these, the upper and lower hierarchies included, emanate from the heavenly or celestial Virgin, the great mother of all religions. We're going to pop out this final footnote for this part. Sapphira is the crown. Kether, in the abstract principle only, as a mathematical x, the unknown quantity. On the plane of differentiated nature, she is the female counterpart of Adam Kadmon, the first androgyne. The Kabbalah teaches that the word fiat lux, Genesis chapter 1, referred to the formation and evolution of the Sephiroth, and not to light as opposed to darkness. Rabbi Simeon says, O companions, man as an emanation was both man and woman. Adam Kadmon verily, and this is the sense of the words, let there be light, and there was light. And this is the twofold man. He did not say, let there be light. We have done this. We've talked about this in the Bible study. Do you know what was actually said here? I am light. That is what he said. It was the vocalization of becoming. That is what happened. He said, I am light. And there was light, and it was good. And he said, I am the waters, separated. And they became. The I am statement is the logos. It is the emanation of creation. It is stating, I am. And that is coming from the divine. But again, that is speculation, right? We were not there at the formation of the world. We did not hear God say, I am. Now, I hold firmly that he did, but it is a speculation. Through reading from Genesis, which we did, and we did a word study on this. That's why I'm talking about this. We went back to the original and saw what it says. It is the double positive of I am. It is not just I am. It is not just I. It is I am, which means I in the present and becoming. I am becoming the light. I am becoming the waters. I am becoming the separation. I am becoming the animals. All of the let there's and the it was I am in Genesis. In the first book of Genesis, or the first chapter of Genesis, every time you see let there be, it was I am. That is an enormous change in meaning for those words. What we have been told is not necessarily the truth in many ways. And the fact that we have to point out this speculation is because of that, right? That is the least deceptive thing contained in the Holy Bible, and it begins with deception. All right, where are we at? Heavenly or celestial virgin, the great mother in all religions, the androgyne, the Sapphira, Adam Kadmon. In its unity, primordial light is the seventh or highest principle. That, I believe, also is untrue, right? I don't believe in the seventh. I believe in the eighth. We talked about the theory of spiritual evolution. There will be a video up here, if I remember to do it, called The Fundamental Harmonics, something along those natures. And it talks about why 8 is better than 7 in these instances every single time. There are natural divisions of 8 that occur everywhere. Harmonics are 8, right? It begins at C, it ends at C. It doesn't end at B. It begins with the new harmonic, the repetition of the pattern. That is the pattern for creation. It is speculation, right? I haven't talked to God, but this is an informed speculation. And I mean, I have talked to God, but he hasn't really spoken back to me in audible words, right? When I receive those things, it is me intuiting, right? Using the intuition that God gave me to make the things. I hear it, but it's not really God. I mean, in a way it is, but it's not like, I need you to go do this thing, right? It is more of a understanding that this thing needs to be done. That is, again, an important distinction. But I believe that the highest would be 8, not 7, for the reasons that we've talked about in the theory of spiritual evolution and in the fundamental harmonics of existence. The pattern is 8, not 7. Primordial light is the 7th or highest principle. Daivi Prakriti, the light of the unmanifested logos. But in its differentiation, it becomes Fohat, or the 7 suns. The former is symbolized by the central point in the double triangle, the latter by the hexagon itself, or the 6 limbs of the microprosperous, the 7th being Malkuth, the bride of the Christian Kabbalist, or our earth. Hence, the expressions. The first, after the one, is divine fire. The second, fire and ether. The third is composed of fire, ether, and water. The fourth, fire, ether, water, and air. So I guess that's their 4, right? See next footnote. These elements of fire, air, etc. are not our compound elements. The next footnote being, this consciousness has no relation to our consciousness. The consciousness of the one manifested, if not absolute, is still unconditioned. Mahat, the universal mind, is the first production of the Brahma creator, but also of the Pradhana, undifferentiated matter. The one is not concerned with man-bearing globes, but with the inner invisible spheres. That would be your chakras. The firstborn are the life, the heart, and the pulse of the universe. The second are its mind or consciousness. We just read that footnote, as said in the commentary. The second order of celestial beings, those of fire and ether, corresponding to spirit or in soul, or the Atma Buddhi, whose names are legion, are still formless, but more definitely substantial. They are the first differentiation in the secondary evolution, or creation, a misleading word. As the name shows, they are the prototypes of the incarnating jivas, or monads, and are composed of the fiery spirit of life. It is through these that passes, like a pure solar beam, the ray which is furnished by them with its future vehicle, the divine soul, Buddhi. These are directly concerned with the host of the higher world of our system. From these twofold units emanate the threefold. In the cosmogony of Japan, when, out of the chaotic mass, an egg-like nucleus appears, having within itself the germ and potency of all the universal as well as all terrestrial life, it is the threefold just named which differentiates. The male, ethereal, yo, principle, ascends, and the female grosser and more material principle, in, is precipitated into the universe of substance, when a separation occurs between the celestial and the terrestrial. From this, the female, the mother, the first rudimentary objective being is born. It is ethereal, without form or sex, and yet it is from this and the mother that the 7 divine spirits are born, from whom will emanate the 7 creations, just as in the Codex Nazareus from Karabatanos and the Mother Spiritus, the 7 evilly disposed, material, spirits are born. It would be too long to give here the Japanese names, but once translated they stand in this order. 1. The invisible celibate, which is the creative logos of the non-creating Father, or the creative potentiality of the latter made manifest. 2. The spirit, or the God, of the rayless depths of chaos, which becomes differentiated matter, or the world stuff, also the mineral realm. 3. The spirit of the vegetable kingdom, of the abundant vegetation. 4. This one is of dual nature, being at the same time the spirit of the earth and the spirit of the sands, the former containing the potentiality of the male element, the latter that of the female element, the two forming a combined nature. These two were one, yet unconscious of being two. In this duality were contained A. The male, dark and muscular being, Isu no Gai no Komi, and B. Iku Gai no Kami, the female, fair and weaker, or more delicate being. Then the fifth and sixth, spirits who are androgynous or dual-sexed. And finally, 7, the seventh spirit, the last emanated from the mother, which appears as the first divine human form, distinctly male and female. It was the seventh creation, as in the Puranas, wherein man is the seventh creation of Brahma. These, Tsanagi, Tsanami, descended into the universe by the celestial bridge, the Milky Way, and Tsanagi, perceiving far below a chaotic mass of cloud and water, thrust his jeweled spear into the depths and dry land appeared. Then the two separated to explore Onokoro, the newly created island world, etc., etc. Such are the Japanese esoteric fables, the rind that conceals the kernel of the same one truth of the secret doctrine, turning back to esoteric explanations in every cosmogony. D. The third order corresponds to the Atma, Buddhi, Manas, spirit, soul, and intellect, and it is called the triads. I don't hold that, right? It is spirit, which is the all-encompassing everything, the soul, which is the differentiated piece of divinity. That would be intellect. Like soul and intellect is the same thing. And then the body, which is the corporeal encapsulation of the spiritual concept in the best way to interpret this, right? It's not spirit, soul, and intellect. The soul and the intellect are the same. The part that makes the decisions is the soul. The part that thinks is the soul. The part that makes things happen is the spirit, right? You have the temple. You have the part making the decisions, the differentiated piece of God that is you. You are not God, but you are a piece of God, right? And then the spirit is what actually turns the now into the next. It's the part that digests your food and turns it into fuel. It takes the oxygen from the air you breathe and disperses it to your red blood cells. That is the spirit. And so for me, it is not spirit, soul, and intellect. It is always going to be spirit, soul, and the temple or body. E. The fourth are substantial entities. This is the highest group among the rupas, atomic forms. Let's go ahead and check this footnote. It is worthy to notice that, while rejecting as a superstition of occultism and religion too, the theory of substantial and invisible beings called angels, elementals, etc., without, of course, having ever looked into the philosophy of these incorporeal entities or thought over them, modern chemistry, owing to observation and discovery, should have unconsciously been forced to adopt and recognize the same ratio of progression and order in the evolution of chemical atoms as occultism does, both for its dionys and atoms, analogy being its first law. As seen above, the very first group of the rupa angels is quaternary, an element being added to each in descending order. So are the atoms, adopting the phraseology of chemistry, monoatomic, diatomic, and tetratomic, progressing downwards. Let it be remembered that fire, water, and air, or the elements of primary creation, so-called, are not the compound elements they are on Earth, but noumenal, homogeneous elements, the spirits thereof. Then follow the septenary groups or hosts, placed on parallel lines in a diagram with atoms. The natures of those beings would be seen to correspond in their downward scale of progression to composite elements in a mathematically identical manner, as to analogy. This refers, of course, only to diagrams made by the occultist, for were the scale of angelic beings to be placed on a parallel line with the scale of the chemical atoms of science, from the hypothetical helium down to uranium, they would, of course, be found to differ. For these have, as correspondents on the astral plane, only the four lowest orders, the higher three principles in the atom, or rather molecule or chemical element, being perceptible only to the initiated Dagma's eye. But then, if chemistry desired to find itself on the right path, it would have to correct its tabular arrangement by that of the occultist, which it may refuse to do. In esoteric philosophy, every physical particle corresponds to and depends on its higher noumenon, the being to whose essence it belongs, as above, so below. The spiritual evolves from the divine, the psycho-mental from the spiritual, tainted from its lower plane by the astral, the whole animate and seemingly inanimate nature evolving on parallel lines and drawing its attributes from above as well as from below. Now, I believe in the entities. I do believe that there is at least two realms of existence past the one we're on, right? We talked about the theory of spiritual evolution. It goes from the singular atom to the plants, to the simple animals, to the thinking animals, to the human beings, to the elemental plane, to the angelic beings, then to the divine, which is both beyond and fully entrained in every single thing. So I believe in these entities, but I don't believe that there is an entity of helium. I don't believe that there's an entity of uranium. And it is funny to note that they did not yet have the understanding of what helium was at this point in time. That is funny to me, right? She is making assumptions and stating them quite firmly, and really you don't know what you're talking about yet, right? The periodic table was still not even being developed at this point, right? They were still discovering elements to begin to start with the periodic table. So, while her understanding was not correct, I do believe that there are entities. I just don't believe that they are in charge of hydrogen, right? I don't believe that there is an angel of hydrogen out there. That isn't like, or even an elemental of hydrogen. Like, there may be an elemental of plasma, right? I'll grant that. There is an elemental of the elements. I just don't think that there is going to be an individualized entity for every single element. That is speculation, but there's a whole lot of speculation going on. So, it is the nursery of the human conscious spiritual souls. They are called the imperishable yivas and constitute, through the order below their own, the first group of the first septenary host. There is another footnote. The number 7 does not imply only 7 entities, but 7 groups or hosts, as explained before. The highest group, the Asuras, born in Brahma's first body, which turned into night, are septenary, in example, divided like the Pitras into 7 classes, 3 of which are Arupa, bodiless, and 4 with bodies. See Vishnu Purana Book 1. They are, in fact, more truly, our Pitras, ancestors, than the Pitras who projected the first physical men. And again, I do not necessarily believe that there is a idealized spiritual man concept, right? That separates me from other idealists, right? I don't believe that there is some hierarchy above us of spiritual man who manifests us. I believe that we are manifested solely by the will of God. And without the intercession that would be necessary for that to happen, right? The first group of the first septenary host, the great mystery of human conscious and intellectual being. For the latter are the field wherein lies concealed in its privation the germ that will fall into generation. The germ will become the spiritual potency in the physical cell that guides the development of the embryo, and which is the cause of the hereditary transmission of faculties and all inherent qualities in man. The Darwinian theory, however, of the transmission of acquired faculties is neither taught nor accepted in occultism. Evolution, in it, proceeds on quite other lines. The physical, according to esoteric teaching, evolving gradually from the spiritual, mental, and psychic. The inner soul of the physical cell, this spiritual plasm that dominates the germinal plasm, is the key that must open one day the gates of the terra incognita of the biologist, now called the dark mystery of embryology. F. The fifth group is a very mysterious one. It is connected with the microcosmic pentagon, the five-pointed star representing man. In India and Egypt, these Dhyanis were connected with the crocodile, and their abode is in Capricornus. These are convertible terms in Indian astrology, as this 10th sign of the zodiac is called Makara, loosely translated crocodile. The word itself is occultly interpreted in various ways, as will be shown further on. In Egypt, the defunct man, whose symbol is the pentagram or the five-pointed star, the points which represent the limbs of man, was shown emblematically transformed into a crocodile, Sabak or Sevek, or the seventh, as Mr. Gerald Massey says, showing it as having been the type of intelligence is a dragon in reality, not a crocodile. He is called the dragon of wisdom, or Manas, the human soul, mind, the intellect principle, called in our esoteric philosophy the fifth principle. So you do not have a good explanation for it. Says the defunct Osirified in chapter, not even going to try, Book of the Dead, or The Ritual, under the glyph of a mummiform god with a crocodile's head. 1. I am the god, crocodile, presiding at the arrival of his soul among men. I am the god crocodile brought for destruction. An allusion to the destruction of divine spiritual purity when a man acquires the knowledge of good and evil. Also to the fallen gods or angels of every theogony. I don't believe that there are fallen gods or angels, right? I don't believe that the angels are gods straight off the top. There is only one God. He is everything. And because he is everything, he has created everything. If there are angels, which I do believe, and there are some that are aligned for the benefit of the humankind and some for the detriment of humankind, that doesn't make them necessarily evil. They are doing what they were created to do. Now, the actions that they take, we find distasteful, right? We find them to be horrible even, right? Mass casualty events. That's pretty horrible. And if there is an angel in charge of that, he is not necessarily what we would consider good. But there is something in that event to learn for everyone involved. Whether that is going home, in which you learn a whole lesson that we don't get on the mortal plane, or if it's a lesson of grief, which is a vitally important lesson even though we do not enjoy learning it. It is for your benefit to learn grief. It is. Your heart learning to express sorrow is one of the reasons why you are here. Just as much as learning happiness is important, learning grief is important. And so, while the event may seem bad, and objectively it may even be bad, there is something to pull from that. I believe that if there is an angel, or whatever you want to call the entity, who is in charge of that specific thing, is not doing evil. It is performing a service for the divine that we don't understand. That doesn't mean that he's fallen, right? The whole concept that this angel rebelled against God and was cast out from heaven, to me is ridiculous, right? That is, as we talked about in Isis Unveiled, that is putting that entity on par with God, right? There is no rebellion against God. The falling is, in my estimation, at least a misinterpretation of what's going on, because God created Lucifer, to use the name that everybody's going to associate with it, to do exactly what he did. Just as much as if Genesis were true and not just an allegory, God created man to eat the apple. If there was no man is going to eat the apple, he would have never been told not to, right? He would have never been tempted to do it. The fucking tree would not have been there. God, the eternal, all-knowing, omnipresent, omniscient being, didn't know that man was going to eat He couldn't see that possible future. Just caught him completely unawares, right? Now, if one of these entities, even Lucifer, planted the tree, then yes, he can be deceived. Just as in Exodus, God was completely flabbergasted that the Israeli people would not immediately do exactly what he said. Completely flabbergasted. He was taken completely unaware. Are you kidding me? The God of creation did not foresee that these rebellious people would be rebellious? Like, it doesn't even make sense when you actually speak it out, right? But people make apologies for it. They're, well, the plan. No. I believe fully that God intended us to eat the fruit, right? If that was the situation. The knowledge of good and evil is the whole reason of being here. So you can learn the lessons of don't do evil, do good. That is literally the point of existence. 2. I am the fish of the great Horus. Of the great Horus. As Mankara is the crocodile, the vehicle of Varuna, I am merged in Sekten. This last sentence gives the corroboration of and repeats the doctrine of esoteric Buddhism, for it alludes directly to the fifth principle, manas, or the most spiritual part of its essence, rather, which merges into, is absorbed by, and made one with Atma Bodhi after the death of man. For Sekin is the residence or loka of the god Kim, Horus, Osiris, or father and son, hence the Devachan of Atma Bodhi. In the ritual of the dead, the defunct is shown entering into Sekhem with Horus, Tehote, and emerging from it as a pure spirit. Thus, the defunct says, I see the forms of myself as various men transforming eternally. I know this chapter. He who knows it takes all kinds of living forms. So, it is important to note that the fifth principle is dealing with men, and I believe that we are on the fifth plane of existence, not the third, the fifth, for reasons that I've stated elsewhere. But mainly because this, like the theory of spiritual evolution, right? 1 is the existence of the element, 5 is the existence of men. And so the pentagram would be a representation of what I believe, not necessarily what is being told, because we are being told that it is the fourth iteration of man. I don't believe that, right? I believe that we are on the fifth plane of existence. I don't believe that we are the fourth iteration of man. That is an important thing to note here as we go forward. Now, the defunct says, I see forms of myself as various men transforming eternally. That is entirely possible. Right? I believe that your soul is here for the experience of being you right now. My soul is here for the experience of being me right now. As we are on this path, there are a multitude of directions which you can take. You can make choices all day long in various ways. I make a choice to make this tea every single day. But in a different timeline, I didn't make this tea today. My life is going in an entirely different direction because I did not make this tea today. It is going in a different direction because instead of placing these glasses on this leg, I placed it on this leg. Right? Every single choice that you make differentiates where your timeline is going. There are bottlenecks in which you cannot avoid, and there are choices that you get to make outside of the bottlenecks. Making the tea, drinking the tea, that is a bottleneck. Making this tea or not making it is a decision choice, right? Drinking the tea and not drinking it is a decision choice. In one, I drink this, and I'm perfectly fine. In another, I drank this and I just died. I choked on it. All of these things happen, in my estimation, and you are in charge of where your particular timeline is going. Now, in my timeline, I'm perfectly fine for drinking my tea. It is part of my healing process. But in the other timeline, my wife is now learning grief. You get to choose the direction that your timeline is going, but all of those variations go on. So, in one way, this is men transforming eternally. But in a different way, I'm here right now in this incorporation with this divine spark making these decisions. But it is entirely possible that 100 years ago, I was Helena Blavatsky writing this book. I don't necessarily believe that, but it is possible. It is possible that the soul, being eternal, decides to come back, and that is something that I do believe, even though it is a speculation. I don't believe that it is attached karmically as described by the Hindus, but I do believe that there is lessons that we are here to learn, and if you don't learn those lessons, you get to come back and repeat them. But it is a voluntary choice. That also would be men transforming eternally, right? Both of those could represent this. Again, that is speculation, but it is something that we can wrap our minds around. Again, this is not something that is going to make that big of a difference in the long run. You are here, incorporated, for a reason. That a reason is to learn various lessons while you are here. It's fun to speculate about, well, maybe I reincarnated from this, and that is why I'm learning these lessons. That's a fun exercise, but it's not something you will ever know. It is not something, even if you go through the process of trying to learn through astral projection or through meditative practices or through hypnosis or whatever. Even if you have as an experience, you may feel like you know it in the way that I feel like I know things, but that doesn't make it true. It can be a full-on hallucination within your mind. That is something to keep in mind, right? I speculate all of the time about things. The timeline differentiation, that is a speculation of mine. I haven't read that particular version anywhere. So that is something that I came up with. I feel like it was through divine revelation. I feel like it is true, but it may not be. That is important to keep in mind. Back to the text. And in verse 35, addressing in magical formula that which is called, in Egyptian esotericism, the ancestral heart, or the reincarnating principle, the permanent ego, the defunct says, "O my heart, my ancestral heart, necessary for my transformations, do not separate thyself from me before the guardian of the scales. Thou art my personality within my breast, divine companion, watching over my flesh's bodies." Now, I do not necessarily hold that there is a God sitting out there with a scale waiting for you to die so that he can judge you. I really do not believe that. I believe that your soul, being the individualization of God, when you die on the mortal plane, your soul vacates the temple and returns to the One. At that point, I believe that you get the full understanding of what your purpose was here, and you get to see how you turned out as opposed to that ideal, right? And so I'm here to learn many lessons, but one of those particular lessons is sexual proclivities, right? I'm a very sexual person. It is one of the things that is always on my mind, and I'm here to learn to overcome that in a variety of ways, but there is a balance to be struck, and I'm a little bit too far on the lustful side of things most of the time. I need to bring it back a little bit towards the chastity side. That is not to say that I am meant to be chaste, but you are meant to have sexual desires for the one person that you are committed to, for most people. And because of that, sometimes denial will be a part of that. How you react to that denial is part of your soul's journey. When you return to source, you get to see how you did in that, right? You get to say, okay, yeah, I kind of learned that lesson. I think I did all right. Or you get to be like, yeah, I really missed that. I didn't even realize that that was one of the lessons I was supposed to be doing. I messed that up completely. And then you get the choice to either come back or not, right? To learn those lessons, to reincarnate voluntarily for that purpose. I don't believe that it is a punishment that is placed upon you. You failed to meet this standard, you didn't make up to the scales, and so you have to go back. I don't believe that. It's speculation, I grant you that, but my speculation works a lot better, in my estimation, than many of the things that we find outlined by other people's religions. So, I don't believe that there is a God sitting there with a scale and a feather trying to see whether or not you pass the test. I don't believe that there is a God that you are going to go up and it's going to be like, oh, your name's not written in this book. You're condemned to hell. I don't believe that. As a matter of fact, I firmly stand on the fact that hell is not a concept in Judaism, and so it should not be one in Christianity. But that is one of the many things which I vary from a lot of people about. All right. It is in Sekhem that lies concealed the mysterious face, or the real man concealed under the false personality. The triple crocodile of Egypt, the symbol of the higher trinity or human triad, Atma, Buddhi, and Manas. And we have a footnote. One of the explanations of the real, though hidden meaning of this Egyptian religious glyph is easy. The crocodile is the first to await and meet the devouring fires of the morning sun, and very soon came to personify the solar heat. What? When the sun arose, it was like the arrival on earth, and among men, of the divine soul which informs the gods. Hence the strange symbolism. The mummy donned the head of the crocodile to show that it was a soul arriving from the earth. That doesn't even make sense, right? The crocodile is the first to await and meet the devouring fires of the morning sun, and came to personify solar heat. So you mean to tell me that the birds in the top of the tree wouldn't be a better representation of that? You mean to tell me that the animals upon the earth are not a better representation than the animal which resides in the waters? This doesn't even make sense, right? Crocodiles are cold-blooded. They do rely upon solar heat, I'll grant you that, but so does everything else. You can take whatever animal you want to represent the rising sun, I guess, but the crocodile to me does not make sense now. The crocodile can very well represent death. That makes sense. And you're talking about a mummy, which is death. That kind of makes sense. The crocodile being the god of death would actually make sense, but not the rising sun, right? Crocodiles hunt. They are in the waters. They're hidden. They're submerged, whatever. They explode with great force. They take their prey and they eat them, but none of that is really in the sunlight. And so it doesn't really make sense. Like, even to the point that they are mostly nocturnal, right? Most of the hunting for alligators and crocodiles occurs later in the day towards the night. They may be present when the sun comes up because they are waiting for the sun, so I guess you could read that into it, but it really doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It really doesn't. Like, this explanation of the crocodile head doesn't really make sense. In all the ancient papyri, the crocodile is called Sebek, seventh, while the water is the fifth principle, esoterically, and, as already stated, Mr. Gerald Massey shows that the crocodile was the seventh soul, the supreme one of seven, the Sia unseen. Even exoterically, Sekhem is the residence of the god Kim, and Kim is Horus, avenging the death of his father Osiris, hence punishing the sins of man when he becomes a disembodied soul. Thus, the defunct Osirified became the god Kim, who gleans the fields of Anru. In example, he gleans either his reward or punishment, as that field is the celestial locality, Devachan, where the defunct is given wheat, the food of divine justice. The fifth group of these celestial beings is supposed to contain in itself the dual attributes of both the spiritual and physical aspects of the universe, the two poles, so to say, of Mahat, the universal intelligence, and the divine nature of man, the spiritual and the physical. Hence, its number 5, multiplied and made into 10, connected with Makara, the 10th sign of the zodiac. Why? The 6th and 7th groups partake of the lower qualities of the quaternary. They are conscious, ethereal entities, as invisible as ether, which are shot out like the boughs of a tree from the first central group of the 4. and shoot out, in their turn, numberless side groups, the lower of which are the nature spirits, or elementals, of countless kinds and varieties, from the formless and unsubstantial, the ideal thoughts of their creators, down to the atomic, though, to human perception, invisible organisms. The latter are considered as the spirits of atoms, for they are the first remove backwards from the physical atom. Sentient, if not intelligent, creatures. They are all subject to karma and have to work it out through every cycle. For, as the doctrine teaches, there are no such privileged beings in the universe, whether in our or other systems, in the outer or inner worlds. Footnote. A world, when called a higher world, is not higher by reason of its location, but because it is superior in quality or essence. Yet, such a world is generally understood by the profane as heaven and located above our heads. In the outer or inner worlds, as the angels of the Western religion and the Judean, a Dayan Kohan has to become one. He cannot be born or appear suddenly on the plane of life as a full-blown angel. The celestial hierarchy of the present Manvantara will find itself transferred in the next cycle of life into higher, superior worlds, and will make room for a new hierarchy, composed of the elect ones of our mankind. Being is an endless cycle within the one absolute eternity, wherein move numberless inner cycles, finite and conditioned. Gods, created as such, would evince no personal merit in being gods. Such a class of beings, perfect only by virtue of the special, immaculate nature inherent in them, in the face of suffering and struggling humanity, and even of the lower creation, would be the symbol of an eternal injustice, quite satanic in nature, an ever-present crime. It is an anomaly and an impossibility in nature. Therefore, the 4 and the 3 have to incarnate as all other beings have. This sixth group, moreover, remains almost inseparable from man, who draws from it all but his highest and lowest principles, or his spirit and body, the 5 middle human principles being the very essence of those Dhyanis. Footnote. Paracelsus calls them the Flagae, the Christians the guardian angels, the occultists the ancestors, the Pitris. They are the sixfold Dayan Kohans, having the 6 spiritual elements in the composition of their bodies. In fact, men, minus the physical body. So to me, that would not be angels. That would be the plane of the elementals. Alone, the divine ray, the Admin, proceeds directly from the One. When asked how can that be, how is it possible to conceive that those gods, or angels, can be at the same time their own emanations and their personal selves? Is it in the same sense in the material world, where the Son is, in one way, his Father, being his blood, but bone of his bone and flesh of his flesh? To this the teachers answer, verily, it is so. But one has to go deep into the mystery of being before one can fully comprehend this truth. Stanza 7, 2. The one ray multiplies the smaller rays. Life precedes form, and life survives the last atom of form, Sathula Sarira, external body. Through the countless rays, the life ray, the one, like a thread, may through many beads, pearls. This sloka expresses the conception, a purely Vedantic one, as already explained elsewhere, of a life thread, sutratma, running through successive generations. How, then, can this be explained? By resorting to a simile, to a familiar illustration, though necessarily imperfect, as all our available analogies must be. Before resorting to it, however, I would ask whether it seems unnatural, least of all supernatural, to any one of us when we consider that process known as the growth and development of a fetus into a healthy baby weighing several pounds evolves from what? from the segmentation of an infinitesimally small ovum and a spermatozoon. And afterwards, we see that baby develop into a 6-foot man. This refers to the atomic and physical expansion from the microscopically small into something very large, from the blank to the naked eye, unseen, into the visible and objective. Science has provided for all of this, and, I dare say, her theories, embryological, biological, and physiological, are correct enough so far as exact observation of the material goes. Nevertheless, the two chief difficulties of the science of embryology, namely, what are the forces at work in the formation of the fetus and the cause of hereditary transmission of likeness, physical, moral, or mental, have never been properly answered, nor will they ever be solved till the day when scientists condescend to accept the occult theories. There's a footnote that says, the materialist and evolutionist of the Darwinian school would be ill-advised to accept the newly worked-out theories of Professor Weissman, the author of Beiträge zur Descendentslehre, with regard to one of the two mysteries of embryology, as above specified, which he seems to have solved as he thinks. 4. When it is solved, science will have stepped over into the domain of the truly occult and stepped forever out of the realm of transformation as taught by Darwin. The two are irreconcilable from the standpoint of materialism. Regarded from that of the occultist, it solves all of these mysteries. Those who are not acquainted with the new discovery of Professor Weissman, at one time a fervent Darwinist, ought to hasten to repair the deficiency. The German embryologist philosopher shows, thus stepping over the heads of the Greek Hippocrates and Aristotle, right back into the teachings of the old Aryans. One infinitesimal cell out of millions of others at work in the function of an organism, determining, alone and unaided, by means of constant segmentation and multiplication, the correct image of the future man, or animal, in his physical, mental, and psychic characteristics. It is that cell which impresses on the face and form of the new individual the features of the parents or of some distant ancestor. It is that cell, again, which transmits to him the intellectual and mental idiosyncrasies of his sires and so on. This plasm is the immortal portion of our bodies, simply through the process of successive assimilations. Darwin's theory, viewing the embryological cell as an essence or the extract form of all other cells, is set aside. It is incapable of accounting for hereditary transmission. Really. But there are two ways of explaining the mystery of heredity. Either the substance of the germinal cell is endowed with the faculty of crossing the whole cycle of transformations that lead to the construction of a separate organism, and then to the reproduction of identical germinal cells, or those germinal cells do not have their genesis at all in the body of the individual, but proceed directly from the ancestral germinal cell passed from father to son through long generations. It is the latter hypothesis that Weissman accepted and has worked upon, and it is to this cell that he traces the immortal portion of man. So far, so good. And when this almost correct theory is accepted, how will biologists explain the first appearance of this everlasting cell, unless man grew like the immortal Topsy and was not born at all, but fell from the clouds? How was that embryological cell born in him? All right, here comes another theory of mine. Right? I believe that sexual congress is a sharing of souls. That you are physically intimate with another person is literally taking a piece of them and giving them a piece of you. That is, if you're doing it correctly, right? Prophylactics have a small measure of interference in that, and by that I mean condoms, for those who don't know what prophylactics are. And so some of the emission is stopped by that, right? But I believe that when you express spermatozoa and it meets with the expressed ovum, that is a small representation of the soul. Now, it has very recently been shown in scientific studies that it is not random which sperm actually makes it. Right? We've always assumed that it was a race and that the fastest one to get there was the one that makes it. And that is not true. The ovum literally allows one sperm to come in, the one it selects. That is a process which we do not understand. But I believe that it is part of the soul and part of the soul's decision. And that is a particular bottleneck, right? Your child coming into existence is a bottleneck for you as well as for them. And so you are expressing your soul through sexual congress. That is why a woman's DNA will change through sexual intercourse. I bet you didn't know that one. That is another very recent discovery, because we have known for a while that a woman who was pregnant received DNA alterations from that, right? They become more like their mate. But that is true whether or not there is actual fertilization or carrying to term of an embryo or not. Every single time that you perform the act of sexual congress, there is an exchange of information being going on. And that exchange of information is on a genetic level due to the soul. Again, this is speculation, but we do not have an explanation of the spark, right? We can talk about all day about how the sperm and the egg come together and this piece of DNA and that piece of DNA, which was not a thing to these people. We can talk all day about them intertwining, but we do not have an explanation for the ensoulment of that, right? The actual beginning of the process, the formation and change that overcomes. It is not one cell replicating. Right? I understand that the understanding of science was different then, so that was their best guess. But the replication of this cell and that cell are not necessarily the same. There is differentiation almost from the beginning of the specific functions of the cells. So that is not a exact replication, right? You don't get a this is me cell and that becomes the this is me body. There is a part that replicates and there are parts that differentiate. That is a process which we are still working out the mechanics of, and I believe that it will be tied to the electromagnetics which make you. All right, back to the text. But if this physical phenomena astonishes no one except in so far as it puzzles the embryologist, why should our intellectual and inner growth, the evolution of the human spiritual to the divine spiritual, be regarded as, or seem, more impossible than the other? Now to the simile. Complete the physical plasm mentioned in the last footnote, the germinal cell of man with all its material potentialities, with the spiritual plasm, so to say, or the fluid that contains the 5 lower principles of the 6th principle Diane, and you have the secret if you are spiritual enough to understand it. When the seed of the animal man is cast into the soil of the animal woman, that seed cannot germinate unless it has been fructified by the 5 virtues, the fluid of, or the emanation from, the principles of the 6-fold heavenly man. Wherefore, the microcosm is represented as a pentagon with the hexagon star, the macrocosm, anthropos, a work in Occult Embryology, Book 1. Then, the functions of the jiva on this earth are of a 5-fold character. In the mineral atom, it is connected with the lowest principles of the spirits of the earth, the 6-fold dhyanis. In the vegetable particle, with the 2nd, the prana, life, in the animal, with all these, plus the 3rd and the 4th. That is closer to what I believe than what they believe. That is funny. The germ must receive the fruition of all, in man, the germ must receive the fruition of all the 5, otherwise he will be born no higher than an animal, namely, a congenital idiot. Thus, in man alone is the Jiva is complete. As to his seventh principle, it is but one of the beams of the universal sun. Each rational creature receives only the temporary loan of that which has to return to its source. While his physical body is shaped by the lowest terrestrial lives, through physical, chemical, and physiological evolution, the blessed ones have naught to do with the purgations of matter. Kabbalah, Chaldean Book of Numbers. It comes to this. Mankind, in his first prototypical, shadowy form, is the offspring of the Elohim of life, or Pitras. In its qualitative and physical aspect, it is the direct progeny of the ancestors, the lowest Dhyanis, or spirits of the earth. For its moral, psychic, and spiritual nature, it is indebted to a group of divine beings, the name and characteristics of which will be given in Book 2. Collectively, men are the handiwork of hosts of various spirits, distributively the tabernacles of these hosts, and occasionally and singly the vehicles of some of them. In our present all-material fifth race, the earthly spirit of the fourth is still strong in us. But we are approaching the time when the pendulum of evolution will direct its swing decidedly upwards, bringing humanity back on a parallel line with the primitive third root race in spirituality. During its childhood, mankind was composed wholly of that angelic host, who were the indwelling spirits that animated the monstrous and gigantic tabernacles of clay of the fourth race built by, as they are now, and composed of countless myriads of lives. Let's go ahead and pop that footnote. Science, dimly perceiving the truth, may find bacteria and other infinitesimals in the human body, and see in them but occasional and abnormal visitors to which diseases are attributed. Occultism, which discerns a life in every atom and molecule, whether in a mineral or human body, in air, fire, or water, affirms that our whole body is built of such lives, the smallest bacteria under the microscope being to them in comparative size like an elephant to the tiniest infusoria. I don't necessarily disagree with this. Your body is an ecosystem, right? You have bacteria all through your digestive tract. You have enzymes that circulate through your blood. There are many microscopic entities within you. There are creatures that live in your eyelids. I'm going to fuck somebody's whole day up with that. But there are creatures that when you sleep at night, climb out of your eyelids and eat the dead skin off of your face. That is a real thing. And then when you wake up, they climb back into your pores. That is real. There are other creatures like that. You have an entire biodiverse, functioning ecosystem contained within you. Every single piece of it intricate to you being healthy. And so I don't necessarily disagree with this, right? The occultism part of this. There is a life in every atom. I believe that every piece of carbon is functioning as intended and designed. And while it doesn't have autonomy, it does have a strive, right? I want to be the best carbon that I can possibly be. And sometimes that means simply being carbon, and sometimes it means connecting with other elements to form something more, such as your bones, right? Calcium carbonate. And so I do believe that there is a purpose for every single element out there, whether that is an immediate purpose or a future purpose or a purpose that has already been served. I do believe that that is true. This sentence will be explained later on in the present commentary. The tabernacles have improved in texture and symmetry of form, growing and developing with the globe that bore them. By tabernacles, they mean your human body, the temple of God, growing and developing with the globe that bore them. But the physical improvement that took place at the expense of spiritual inner man and nature, and again, that is speculation. The three middle principles in earth and man become, with every race, more material, the soul stepping back to make room for the physical intellect, the essence of elements becoming the material and composite elements now known. Man is not, nor could he ever be, the complete product of the Lord God, but he is the child of the Elohim, so arbitrarily changed into the singular masculine gender. I am going to, again, come into complete disagreement with that. I believe that we are here, incorporated with our soul, which is the individualized piece of God, by the express will of God. I don't necessarily believe that we had to have an intervention. I don't believe that the Elohim necessarily had to create us. It is possible that they did, but again, that is speculation. I believe that we were created by the will of God, the express will of God, with no intervention necessary, any more than the carbon needed an Elohim to create it. The first Dionys, commissioned to create man in their image, could only throw off their shadows, like a delicate model for the nature spirits of matter to work upon. So what you're saying is, God not only could not create you, but he created these Elohim to create you, but they couldn't do it correctly. Okay. Man is, beyond any doubt, formed physically out of the dust of the earth, but his creators and fashioners were many, nor can it be said that the Lord God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, unless that God is identified with the one life. And here's the thing. This quote right here is not a statement of fact, right? It is a speculation. It may be a true speculation, but it is still a speculation. Nobody recorded the event. We have, thousands of years later, someone expressing their understanding of the event. That is important, right? Just as much as nobody was there when God spoke the I am statement, which we spent so much time on just a minute ago, nobody was there when the first human was created. I mean, somebody was, but nobody presently alive was. And so even 20, 40 years later, there was no writing. 100 years later, there may have been writing. We don't know, but I'm assuming not. And so to state that that statement is fact is a fallacy, right? The Lord God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life is an assumption. It is a speculation, but it is not a fact. And so unless that a God is identified with the one life is another assumption, right? Man is beyond any doubt formed physically out of the dust of the earth. You can kind of say that because of the way that the assimilation of the lower spheres happens, right? We talk about the spiritual evolution. Carbon gets assimilated into plants. Plants get assimilated into animals. Animals get assimilated into us. That's the process, basically, of spiritual evolution. And so we do by breathing, right? I just breathe in a whole lung full of oxygen and nitrogen and carbon. And that carbon is going to become part of me, right? Not all of it. Some of it will be expressed back out as carbon dioxide. But part of it is going to be assimilated into my lung tissue. Part of it will be distributed into my toenails. I also incorporate it through drinking my tea or eating a steak, right? That is the incorporation of carbon, and so it does, from that dust, which is carbon, become part of me. It turns into calcium carbonate. It turns into muscle tissue. It turns into fat, a lot. But regardless, I am assimilating that lower form of life into the higher form of life. And so we are created from dust. But we're also not created from dust. We're created from the expression of the two souls into the one, and that begins our life. Part of that is the incorporation of the corporeal, which would be from the dust, but part of it is completely separated from dust. That would be the divine spark, which is you. That is, everything is part of God, so yes, that does too. There are many different ways to look at these speculations, but they are speculations. Nobody wrote down the literal words of God when he created the existence. Not a Christian, not a Jew, not a Hindu, not a Buddhist. Nobody was there. You can speculate upon it, but it does not make it necessarily true. right? I believe that we are the complete product of Lord God. That is not the Jewish Lord God. It is not the Christian Lord God. It is the God that is beyond and above their God. Omnipresent, though invisible, and unless the same operation is attributed to God on behalf of every living soul, and I do attribute that to God for every living soul, or nefesh, which includes carbon, right? Which is the vital soul, not the divine spirit or ruach, right? That is the body, not the soul, right? When they're representing the divine spirit here, that is the soul. The divine spirit is the all, right? To me, the Holy Spirit is literally everything in existence. The body is your carbon temple, and then your soul is the part that makes the decisions, right? Which ensures the man alone, then ensures to man alone, a divine degree of immortality that no animal, as such, could ever attain in this cycle of incarnation. That is an assumption based upon your view as being better than, right? You are better than the dog. You are better than the cat. You are better than the ant. No, not really. You may have a little bit more significance in things we do not know. You may have the power to crush and control those things, but that does not mean that they do not have a degree of immortality. That does not mean that my dog does not have a soul, right? It is entirely possible that he does. I believe that he does because of the way that he acts. Not everybody is going to hold that belief. I am perfectly fine with that, but I do. I do believe that everything has a soul. Everything serves a purpose. I don't believe that it is horrible to kill and eat an animal because that animal's purpose is to be killed and eaten. Just as much as a plant's purpose is to be killed and eaten. For not all of them, but most of them, right? And so, to me, there is no distinction, right? The value that we place upon human life does not necessarily mean that we are correct in placing it above the value of another creature's life. We are meant to be stewards because we can think and we have the process of time living on the 5D plane. And so we are responsible for many of these animals. We are meant to be stewards of them, but that does not mean that they do not have a soul. That is something that people have extrapolated from their desire to be more than. It is the inadequate distinctions made by the Jews, and now by our Western metaphysicians, who, not knowing of and being unable to understand, hence to accept more than a triune man, spirit, soul, body, thus confuse the breath of life with immortal spirit. We will pop out this footnote. The learned and very philosophical author of New Aspects of Life would impress upon his readers that the nefesh chaya, living soul, according to the Hebrews, proceeded from, or was produced by, the infusion of the spirit, or breath of life, into the quickening body of man, and was to supersede and take the place of that spirit in the thus constituted self, so that the spirit passed into, was lost sight of, and disappeared in the living soul. The human body, he thinks, ought to be viewed as a matrix in which, and from which, the soul, which he seems to place higher than the spirit, is developed. Considered functionally, and from the standpoint of activity, the soul stands undeniably higher in this finite and conditioned world of Maya. The soul, he says, is ultimately produced from the animated body of man. I disagree wholeheartedly with that. I believe that the body of man is the physical expression of the soul, not the other way around. Thus, the author identifies spirit, Atma, simply with the breath of life. The Eastern occultists will demur this statement, for it is based on the erroneous conception that prana and Atma, or Yavatma, are one and the same thing. The author supports the argument by showing that with the ancient Hebrews, Greeks, and even Latins, ruach, pneuma, and spiritus, with the Jews, undeniably, and with the Greeks and Romans, very probably, meant wind. the Greek word animos, wind, and the Latin anima, soul, having suspicious relation. This is very far-fetched. A legitimate battlefield for deciding this question is hardly to be found, since Mr. Pratt seems to be a practical, matter-of-fact metaphysician, a kind of Kabbalist positivist, and the Eastern metaphysicians, especially the Vedantins, are all idealists. The occultists are also of the extreme esoteric Vedantin school, and they call the one life, Parabrahm, the great breath and the whirlwind, but they disconnect the seventh principle entirely from matter or any relation to or connection with it. This applies also directly to the Protestant theologians, who, in translating verse 8 of chapter 3 in the fourth gospel, have entirely perverted the meaning. Indeed, the verse is made to say, "The wind bloweth where it listeth," instead of, "The Spirit goeth where it willeth," as in the original and also the translation of the Greek Eastern Church. Thus, the philosophy of psychic, spiritual, and mental relations with man's physical functions is in almost inextricable confusion. Neither the old Aryan nor the Egyptian psychology are now properly understood, nor can they be assimilated without accepting the esoteric septenary, or, at any rate, the Vedantic quinqueparatite division of the human inner principles. Failing which, it will be forever impossible to understand the metaphysical and purely psychic and even physiological relations between the Dayan Kohans, or angels, on the one plane, and humanity on the other. No Eastern, Aryan, esoteric works are so far published, but we possess the Egyptian papyri which speak clearly of the seven principles or the seven souls of man. Footnote. Vide, in Part 2, Book 2, The Seven Souls of Man, the divisions made respectively by Messrs. Gerald Massey and Franz Lambert. The Book of the Dead gives a complete list of the transformations that every defunct he undergoes, while divesting himself, one by one, of all those principles, materialized for the sake of clearness into ethereal entities or bodies. We must, moreover, remind those who try to prove that the ancient Egyptians knew nothing of and did not teach reincarnation, that the soul, the ego or self, of the defunct is said to be living in eternity. It is immortal, coeval with and disappearing with the solar boat. An example for the cycle of necessity. This soul emerges from the Tiao, the realm of the cause of life, and joins the living on earth by day and returns to Tiao every night. This expresses the periodical existences of the ego. The shadow, the astral form, is annihilated, devoured by the uraeus. The mains will be annihilated. The two twins, the fourth and fifth principles, will be scattered, but the soul bird, the divine swallow, and the uraeus of flame, Manas and Admabudi, will live in the eternity, for they are their mother's husbands. Let's dig into that. Footnote. Another suggestive analogy between the Aryan, or Brahmanical, and the Egyptian esotericism. The former called the Pitris the lunar ancestors of men, and the Egyptians made of the moon god the Hot Esmun, the first human ancestor. This moon god expressed the seven nature powers that were prior to himself, and was summed up in him as his seven souls, of which he was the manifester as the eighth one, hence the eighth sphere. That would be the 7 plus 1, meaning 8. The 7 rays of the Chaldean heptachus, or Io, on the Gnostic stones indicate the same septenary of souls. The first form of the mystical 7 was seen to be figured in heaven by the 7 large stars of the Great Bear, the constellation assigned by the Egyptians to the Mother of Time, and of the 7 elemental powers. See the 7 souls, etc. As well known to every Hindu, this same constellation represents in India the 7 rishis, and as such is called Riksha and Kitra Sikandinas. Like alone produces like. The earth gives man his body, the gods, Dhyanis, his 5 inner principles, the psychic shadow, of which those gods are often the animating principle. Spirit, Atman, is one and indiscrete. It is not in the Tiao. For what is the Tiao? The frequent allusion to it in the Book of the Dead contains a mystery. Tiao is the path of the night sun, the inferior hemisphere, or the infernal region of the Egyptians, placed by them on the concealed side of the moon. The human being, in their esotericism, came out from the moon, a triple mystery, astronomical, physiological, and psychical, all at once. He crossed the whole cycle of existence and returned to his birthplace before issuing from it again. Thus, the defunct is shown arriving in the west, receiving his judgment before Osiris, resurrecting as the god Horus, and circling round the sidereal heavens, which is an allegorical assimilation to Ra, the sun. Then, having crossed the Nut, the celestial abyss, returning once more to Tiao, an assimilation to Osiris, who, as the god of life and reproduction, inhabits the moon. Plutarch, Isis and Osiris, shows the Egyptians celebrating a festival called the ingress of Osiris into the moon. In chapter Life is promised after death, and the renovation of life is placed under the patronage of Osiris Lunas, because the moon was the symbol of life renewals or reincarnations, owing to its growth, waning, dying, and reappearance every month. In the Dankmo 4:5, it is said, "O Osiris Lunas, that renews to thee thy renewal." And Sephek says to Seti 1, Marriott's Abydos, plate 51, "Thou renewest thyself as the god Lunas when a babe." It is still better explained in a Louvre papyrus, P. Etudes Egyptologicus. Couplings and conceptions abound when he, Osiris Lunas, is seen in heaven on that day. Says Osiris, "O sole radiant beam of the moon, I issue from the circulating multitudes of stars. Open me the Tiao, for, Osiris, I will issue by day to do what I have to do among the living." Book of the Dead, chapter 2. An example, to produce conceptions. Osiris was God manifest in generation, because the ancients knew, far better than the moderns, the real occult influences of the lunar body upon the mysteries of conception. Footnote. In the oldest system we find the moon always male. Thus, Soma is, with the Hindus, a kind of sidereal Don Juan, a king, and the father, albeit illegitimate, of Buddha. Wisdom, which relates to occult knowledge, a wisdom gathered through the thorough acquaintance with lunar mysteries, including those of sexual generation. Later on, when the moon became connected with the female goddesses, footnote, if instead of being taught in Sunday school useless lessons from the Bible, the armies of the ragged and the poor were taught astrology, so far, at any rate, as the occult properties of the moon and its hidden influences on generation are concerned, then there would be little need to fear increase of the population, nor to resort to the questionable literature of the Malthusians for its arrest. For it is the moon and her conjunctions that regulate conceptions, and every astrologer in India knows it. During the previous and present races, at least at the beginning of this one, those who indulged in marital relations during certain lunar phases that made those relations sterile were regarded as sorcerers and sinners. But even now, those sins of old, based on occult knowledge and the abuse of it, would appear preferable to the crimes of today, which are perpetrated because of the complete ignorance of and disbelief in all such occult influences. Now, I have expressed before, and I will say it again, I'm going to do a study of astrology, much like we're doing here, right? I cannot fully dismiss things until I have studied them, and so I won't completely dismiss this, even though I know that it is almost certainly full of shit, right? The moon has an influence in as much as it is a tracker of time. And so if you have several people, women, who are in sync with their cycles, it can appear that the moon is having an influence on fertilization. But we happen to know these days that that is not the case, right? What happens is that the egg is expressed from the ovary into the uterus, and it is fertilized by the process of insemination. That there is a timed cycle for things to happen, the period flow and all of that, tearing away the uterine wall and getting rid of the old system and bringing in a new system, is on a schedule. It is a 28-day turnaround, much like the moon. And so it is easy to understand where this misconception came from, but it is still a misconception. The moon being in a particular phase does not really have an effect on whether or not you get pregnant. The moon does have effects upon us, however, and that is evidenced by go to an emergency room on a full moon night, and it is much different than on a new moon night, right? The term lunatic literally has to do with people going crazy because of the moon. That is somewhat, at least, based in reality. But looking at birth records, it will be quite easy to discern that there is pretty much an equal number of births every single day of the year. It does fluctuate. Some days there may be a few more, some days there may be a few less. But on average, over time, every single day is pretty close to the same as every other single day. That would put to rest this particular thing. Now, I have not gone through the birth rate charts, and I have not seen that in a way that is definitive, but it is my assumption that it would be definitive if we were to actually do so. Again, that is an assumption, it is a speculation, but I am fairly confident that that would bear out. So, no, the moon does not get you pregnant, right? It may have a little bit to do with whether or not you feel frisky enough to get pregnant, but it probably does not have anything to do with whether the conception sticks. Later on, when the moon became connected with the female goddess, with Diana, Isis, Artemis, Juno, etc., that connection was due to a thorough knowledge of physiology and female nature, physical as much as psychic. But, primarily, the sun and moon were only visible, and so to say, tangible, by their effects, psychic and physiological deities, the Father and the Son, while space and air in general, or the expanse of heaven called Nut by the Egyptians, was the concealed spirit or breath of these two. These Father and Son were interchangeable in their functions and worked harmoniously together in their effects upon terrestrial nature and humanity. Hence, they were regarded as one, though two impersonified entities. They were both males, and both had their distinct and also collaborative work on the causative generation of humanity. So much from the astronomical and cosmic standpoints, viewed and expressed in symbolical language, which became in our last races theological and dogmatic. But behind this veil of cosmic and astrological symbols, there were the occult mysteries of anthropography and the primeval genesis of man. And, in this, no knowledge of symbols, or even the key to the post-Diluvian symbolical language of the Jews, will or can help, save only with reference to that which was laid down in national scriptures for exoteric use, the sum of which, however cleverly veiled, was only the smallest portion of the real primitive history of each people, often relating, moreover, as in the Hebrew Scriptures, merely to the terrestrial human, not divine life of that nation. That psychic and spiritual element belonged to mystery and initiation. There were things never recorded in scrolls, but, as in Central Asia, on rocks and in subterranean crypts. Nevertheless, there was a time when the whole world was of one lip and of one knowledge, and man knew more of his origin than he does now, and thus knew that the sun and moon, however large a part they do play in the constitution, growth, and development of the human body, were not the direct causative agents of his appearance on earth. These agents being, in truth, the living and intelligent powers which the occultists call Dayan Kohans. As to this, a very learned admirer of the Jewish esotericism tells us that the Kabbalah says expressly that Elohim is a general abstraction, what we call in mathematics a constant coefficient, or a general function, entering into all construction, not particular, that is, by the general ratio of 3:1415 pi, the astro-dianic and Elohistic figures. To this the Eastern occultist replies, quite so. It is an abstraction to our physical senses. To our spiritual perceptions, however, and to our inner spiritual eye, the Elohims, or Dianis, are no more an abstraction than our soul and spirit are to us. Reject the one and you reject the other, since that which is the surviving entity in us is partly the direct emanation from and partly those celestial entities themselves. Again, I disagree with that. One thing is sure. The Jews were perfectly acquainted with sorcery and various maleficent forces. But, with the exception of some of their great prophets and seers like Daniel and Ezekiel, Enoch belonging to a far distant race and not to any nation at all, as a generic character, they knew little of, nor would they deal with, the real divine occultism, their national character being averse to anything which had no direct bearing upon their own ethnical, tribal, and individual benefits. Witness their own prophets and curses thundered by them against the stiff-necked race. But even the Kabbalah plainly shows the direct relation between the Sephiroth, or Elohim, and men. That is because it is a speculative process. Therefore, when it is proved to us that the Kabbalistic identification of Jehovah with Bina, the female Sephiroth, has still another, a sub-occult meaning in it, then, and then only, the occultist will be ready to pass the palm of perfection to the Kabbalists. Until then, it is asserted that, as Jehovah is, in the abstract sense of a one living God, a single number, a metaphysical figment, and a reality only when put in its proper place as an emanation and a Sephiroth, we have a right to maintain that the Zohar, as witnessed by the Book of Numbers at any rate, gave out originally, before the Christian Kabbalist had disfigured it, and still gives out the same doctrine that we do. In example, it makes men emanate, not just from one celestial man, but from a septenary group of celestial men, or angels, just as in Pymander, the Thought Divine. We have done Pymander, the Thought Divine. It is part of the Ancient Lore playlist. Stanza 7, 3. When the one becomes two, the threefold appears, the three are linked into one, and it is our thread, O Lanu, the heart of the man-plant, called Saptaparna. When the one becomes two, the threefold appears. To wit, when the one eternal drops its reflection into the region of manifestation, that reflection, the ray, differentiates the wattas of space, or, in the words of the Book of the Dead, chaos ceases through the effulgence of the ray of primordial light dissipating total darkness by the help of the great magic power of the word of the central sun. Chaos becomes male-female and water incubated through light, and the threefold being issues as its firstborn. Osiris Ptah, or Ra, creates his own limbs, like Brahma, by creating the gods destined to personify his phases during the cycle. The Egyptian Ra, issuing from the deep, is the divine universal soul in its manifested aspect. So is Narayana, the Purusha, concealed in Akasa and present in ether. This is the metaphysical explanation and refers to the very beginning of evolution, or we should rather say, of theogony. The meaning of the stanza, when explained from another standpoint in its reference to the mystery of man and his origin, is still more difficult to comprehend. In order to form a clear conception of what is meant by the one becoming two, and then being transformed into the threefold, the student has to make himself thoroughly acquainted with what we call rounds. If he refers to esoteric Buddhism, the first attempt to sketch out an approximate outline of archaic cosmogony, he will find that a round is meant the serial evolution of nascent material nature of the 7 globes of our chain. Footnote. Several inimical critics are anxious to prove that no 7 principles of man or septenary constitution of our chain were taught in our earlier volume, Isis Unveiled. Though in that work the doctrine could only be hinted at, there are many passages, nevertheless, in which the septenary constitution of both man and chain is openly mentioned. Speaking of the Elohim in Volume 2, page 420, it is said, "They remain over the 7th heaven, or spiritual world, for it is they who, according to the Kabbalist, formed in succession the 6 material worlds, or rather, attempts at worlds that preceded our own, which, they say, is the 7th. Our globe is, of course, upon the diagram representing the chain, the 7th and the lowest, though, as the evolution on these globes is cyclic, it is the 4th in descending the arc of matter." And again, on page 367, volume 2, it is written, "In the Egyptian notions, as in those of all the other faiths founded on philosophy, man was not merely an union of soul and body, he was a trinity when spirit was added to it. And, besides, that doctrine made him consist of body, astral form, or shadow, the animal soul, the higher soul, and terrestrial intelligence, and a 6th principle, etc., etc., the 7th, spirit. So clearly are these principles mentioned that even in the index one finds on page 683 6 principles of man, the 7th being the synthesis of the 6th, and not a principle, but a ray of the absolute all in strict truth." Now, we have discussed quite extensively my 7 and the 8, right? I do believe that the soul, the body, and the spirit are the Trinity, right? The Trinity when spirit was added to it. But I don't necessarily believe that the astral form, the shadow, the animal soul, the higher soul, the terrestrial intelligence, and the 6th principle, and then the 7th with spirit, I don't necessarily believe that to be explained correctly, right? Now, you can take these and extrapolate from them an overlay of the chakras. That is a possibility, right? The astral form would have to be the 8th, however, because that is the external one. The shadow would have to be the base, because that is the formation of the terrestrial life. The animal would probably be the reproductive, so sacral fits. The higher soul would have to be at least the 3rd eye. The terrestrial intelligence is probably the 3rd eye. The 6th principle is not even mentioned, and the 7th being spirit, that would probably be associated with the heart more than anything. So you could extrapolate an overlay, but it is not necessarily correct. All right, where are we at? Of the 7 globes of our chain, with their mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdoms, man being there included in the latter and standing at the head of it, during the whole period of a life cycle. The latter would be called by the Brahmins a day of Brahma. It is, in short, one revolution of the wheel, our planetary chain, which is composed of 7 globes, or 7 separate wheels, in another sense this time. When evolution has run downward into matter from planet A to planet G, or Z, as the Western students call it, it is one round. In the middle of the fourth revolution, which is our present round, evolution has reached its acme of physical development, crowned its work with the perfect physical man, and from this point begins its work, spirit-ward. So you're saying that this is the perfect expression of mankind? The current one? The one that we're in now with cancer and diabetes, that's the perfect expression? Okay. All this needs little repetition, as it is well explained in esoteric Buddhism. That which was hardly touched upon, and of which the little that was said has misled many, is the origin of man, and it is upon this that a little more light may now be thrown. Just enough to make the stanza more comprehensible, as the process will be fully explained only in its legitimate place in Book 2. Now, every round on the descending scale is but a repetition in a more concrete form of the round which preceded it, as every globe, down to our fourth sphere, the actual Earth, is a grosser and more material copy of the more shadowy sphere which precedes it in their successive order on the three higher planes. And again, this is something that I just completely disagree with, like all together. See diagram in stanza 6, com 6. On its way upward on the ascending arc, evolution spiritualizes and etherealizes, so to speak, the general nature of all, bringing it on to a level with the plane on which the twin globe of the opposition is placed. The result being that when the seventh globe is reached, in whatever round, the nature of everything that is evolving returns to the condition it was in at the starting point. Plus, every time a new and superior degree in the states of consciousness. Thus, it becomes clear that the origin of man, so called, on this, our present round, or life cycle on this planet, must occupy the same place in the same order, save details based on local conditions and time, as in the preceding round. Again, it must be explained and remembered that, as the work of each round is said to be apportioned to a different group of so-called creators or architects, so is that of every globe. In example, it is under the supervision and guidance of special builders and watchers, the various Dayan Kohans. The group of the hierarchy which is commissioned to create men is a special group. Footnote on create. Creation is an incorrect word to use, as no religion, not even the sect of the Vishishta Advaitis in India, one which anthropomorphizes even Parabrahman, believes in creation out of nihil, as Christians and Jews do, but in evolution out of pre-existing materials. Those materials had to come from somewheres at some point. That is the hard part for the materialist, right? For the realist. Where did it come from? What was it? Was it Hawking that said, I can explain anything if you grant me one miracle? Something along those lines, right? If you give me the miracle of the creation, I can explain everything else. So it had to come from somewheres at some point. Even if this is a reiteration of a previous round, which I don't necessarily believe, even if that were true, the material had to come from somewhere. All right. Men is a special group, then, yet it evolved shadowy man in this cycle just as a higher and still more spiritual group evolved him in the third round. But, as it is the sixth on the downward scale of spirituality, the last, and seventh being the terrestrial spirits, elementals, which gradually form, build, and condense his physical body, this sixth group evolves no more than the future man's shadowy form, a filmy, hardly visible, transparent copy of themselves. It becomes the task of the fifth hierarchy, the mysterious beings that preside over the constellation Capricornicus, Makara, or crocodile, in India as in Egypt, to inform the empty and ethereal animal form and make of it the rational man. This is one of those subjects upon which very little may be said to the general public. It is a mystery, truly, but only to him who is prepared to reject the existence of intellectual and conscious spiritual beings in the universe, limiting full consciousness to man alone, and that only as a function of the brain. I believe that dogs are conscious. I believe that ants are conscious. I believe that plants are conscious. Many are these among these spiritual entities who have incarnated bodily in man since the beginning of his appearance, and who, for all that, still exist as independently as they did before in the infinitudes of space. To put it more clearly, the invisible entity may be bodily present on Earth without abandoning, however, its status and functions in these supersensuous regions. If this needs explanation, we can do no better than to remind the reader of like cases in spiritualism, even though such cases are very rare, at least as regards the nature of the entity incarnating. Footnote. The so-called spirits that may occasionally possess themselves of bodies of mediums are not the monads or higher principles of disembodied personalities. Such a spirit can only be either an elementary or a nirmankaya. I do believe that possession is a possibility, right? I do believe that there are disincorporated spirits, which is my soul, unsatisfied with the ending, deciding to cling. And so my soul, if that was the case, could indeed enter a vacated vessel. I don't necessarily believe in forcible inhabitation or possession. I believe that it has to be voluntary. You either have to agree to it or abandonment, such as the case of astral travel, something along those natures. If you are not properly warded when you do astral traveling, you can get locked out of your body. And so that I do believe is a possibility. Or you can voluntarily allow the possession to happen, as we see in mediums. That would be the sixth plane of existence along with the elementaries. But the disincorporated spirits would not be the same as the elementary spirits. It is possible to be possessed by the elementaries, but they are not ghosts or the disembodied spirits. All right. Though such cases are very rare, at least in regards to the nature of the entity incarnating or taking temporary possession of a medium. Just as certain persons, men and women, reverting to parallel cases among living persons, whether by virtue of a peculiar organization or through the power of acquired mystic knowledge, can be seen in their double in one place, while the body is many miles away. So the same thing can occur in the case of superior beings. All of that is speculation, of course. Man, philosophically considered, is, in his outward form, simply an animal, hardly more perfect than his pithecoid-like ancestor of the third round. He is a living body, not a living being, since the realization of existence, the ego sum, necessitates self-consciousness, and an animal can only have direct consciousness or instinct. This was so well understood by the ancients that the Kabbalists even made of soul and body two lives independent of each other. And this is where it is important to note my differentiation between the third and the fourth realm, right? The third realm is the unthinking, instinctual animals, whereas the fourth realm is the thinking, but still instinctual animals, right? You can train some animals and not others. That is the differentiation between the third and the fourth. You can train the fourth, right? They can anticipate. They do have some sense of time. They do have a small measure of thought, but they do not have the mastery of either of those. If my dog does something that he knows that he will get in trouble for, that is a realization. You do not have that in the non-trainable animals. They just do their thing. And so that is an important distinction to pay attention to for me, right? The necessitates self-consciousness that an animal can only have direct consciousness, to me, is not correct, right? Some animals do have direct consciousness. I believe that we are set apart from the fourth level into the fifth level because we have the concept of thought with mastery of it to a certain degree, and time and the planning of it, right? We don't have the ability to go forward in time, but we have the ability to anticipate forward in time. We don't have the ability to go backwards in time, but we have the ability to assimilate knowledge from the passage of time. That puts us on the fifth plane, as opposed to the fourth, where they don't have those things. All right, now we will check out the footnote for other. On page 340 to 351, Genesis of the Soul and the New Aspects of Life, the author states the Kabbalistic teaching. They held that, functionally, spirit and matter of corresponding opacity and density tended to coalesce, and that the resultant created spirits in the disembodied state were constituted on a scale in which the differing opacities and transparencies of elemental or uncreated spirit were reproduced, and that these spirits in the disembodied state attracted, appropriated, digested, and assimilated elemental spirit and elemental matter whose condition was conformed to their own. They therefore taught that there was a wide difference in the condition of created spirits, and that in the intimate association between the spirit world and the world of matter, the more opaque spirits in the disembodied state were drawn towards the more dense parts of the material world, and therefore tended towards the center of the earth, where they found the conditions most suited to their state, while the more transparent spirits passed into the surrounding aura of the planet, the most rarefied finding their home in its satellite. The soul, whose body vehicle is the astral, ethereal, ethero-substantial envelope, the divine chakra, could die and man be still living on earth. In example, the soul could free itself from and quit the tabernacle for various reasons, such as insanity, spiritual and physical depravity, etc. That would be including astral travel. Oh, I missed this part of the former footnote. So this relates exclusively to our elementary spirits and has not to do with either the planetary, sidereal, cosmic, or inter-etheric intelligent forces or angels, as they are termed by the Roman Church. The Jewish Kabbalists, especially the practical occultists, who dealt with ceremonial magic, busied themselves solely with the spirits of the planets and the elementals, so-called. Therefore, this covers only a portion of the esoteric teaching. And that would be the difference between the sixth and the seventh plane of existence, right? The sixth being the one that can take habitation within you, and the seventh being the ones that can't. The ones that can't have a full grasp of thought and time. All right, now to this footnote. The possibility of the soul, in example, the eternal spiritual ego, dwelling in the unseen worlds, while his body goes on living on earth, is a preeminently occult doctrine, especially in Chinese and Buddhist philosophy. See Isis Unveiled, Volume 1, page 602 for an illustration. Many are the soulless men among us, for the occurrence is found to take place in wicked materialists as well as in persons who advance in holiness and never turn back. And that is going to be something that I completely disagree with. There are no soulless people. None. Right? They are all serving their purpose, and their purpose may not be aligned with what you consider to be good, but they have their souls. This goes back to the NPC and the multiverse theory, which is part of the infinite integrations, and I'm already going to try to remember to link one independent video, so go and look that one up yourself. But the NPC theory is this in short. I believe that we are each in charge of our own timeline, right? In my timeline, I am the player character. I am the important one. Everyone else is not. Most of the time, everyone else in the entirety of the world is an NPC, a non-player character, in my timeline. But in their timeline, every single one of them is the player character. and I am the NPC. We can, at various points, come together in alignment to learn lessons or to achieve goals. Me and my wife are in alignment, right? Me and my children are in alignment. Me and my friends are in alignment, but not always. And like in an RPG, if you're unfamiliar with role-playing games, most of the time when you are in an online role-playing game, you are by yourself. You are doing quests and leveling up. You are gathering the materials that you need for various things. But every once in a while, you come together with other player characters. They were NPCs. They were not in your group. But when they come into your group, you are aligned as player characters. You are achieving this specific goal. At that point, our timelines are in alignment. We are going for this goal. When we achieve the goal, we can either continue towards another goal or we can separate. At that point of separation, you are no longer a player character in my timeline. You are a non-player character. One of the best ways to understand this is, have you ever been in an argument and then expressed yourself in a way that is antithetical to the way in which you desire to express yourself? You say something that is excessively mean, and you know it. You never meant to say it, but it just kind of comes out of your mouth. That is you playing your part as an NPC in their timeline. That was a bottleneck. That was one of the lessons that you are here to help them learn. You also are meant to learn something from that. But that is you acting as a non-player character. You are acting outside of yourself. I would never say that, but you did. That is why. It is because there is a bottleneck there. And while you have deviated in your timeline enough to where that is not your character. Before you were here, you agreed to help them learn that lesson. And in order for that to happen, you have to step outside of your character currently into what was more than likely your character at an earlier period in time. You have changed your timeline, but they still need to learn that lesson. And the only way that you can help them learn that lesson is by being that non-player character to them. So, everybody has a soul, even if we are not all aligned for the same goal on the same timeline. We read that, right? Yeah. Okay. Therefore, that which living men, initiates, can do, the Dhyanies, who have no physical body to hamper them, can do still better. This was the belief of the antediluvians, and it is fast becoming that of modern intellectual society in spiritualism, besides the Greek and Roman churches, which teach the ubiquity of their angels. The Zoroastrians regarded their Amshapins as dual entities, furores, applying this duality, in esoteric philosophy at any rate, to all the spiritual and invisible denizens of the numberless worlds in space which are visible to our eye. In a note of Damascus, 6th century, on the Chaldean oracles, we have a triple evidence of the universality of this doctrine, for he says, in these oracles, the 7 cosmocrators of the world pillars, mentioned likewise by St. Paul, are double, one said being commissioned to rule the superior worlds, the superior and the sidereal, and the other to guide and watch over the worlds of matter. Such is also the opinion of Iamblichus, who makes an evident distinction between the archangels and the archontes. See De Mysteris. The above may be applied, of course, to the distinction made between the degrees or orders of spiritual beings, and it is in this sense that the Roman Catholic Church tries to interpret and teach the difference. For, while the archangels are, in her teaching, divine and holy, their doubles are denounced by her as devils. See footnote. This identity between the spirit and its material double, in man is the reverse, explains still better the confusion, alluded to already in this work, made in the names and individualities as well as the numbers of the Rishis and Prajapatis, especially between those of Sadhya Yuga and the Mahabharatan period. It also throws additional light on what the secret doctrine teaches with regard to the root and the seed Manus. See Book 2 on the primitive Manus of humanity. Not only those progenitors of our mankind, but every human being, we are taught, has its prototype in the spiritual spheres, which prototype is the highest essence of his seventh principle. Thus, the 7 Manus become 14, the root Manu being the prime cause, and the seed Manu, in effect. And when the latter reached from Satya Yuga, the first stage, to the heroic period, these Manus, or Rishis, become 21 in number. But the word furor is not to be understood in this sense, for it means simply the reverse of the opposite side of some attribute or quality. Thus, when the occultists say that the demon is the lining of God, evil, the reverse of the metal, he does not mean 2 separate actualities, but the 2 aspects or facets of the same unity. Now, the best man living would appear side by side with an archangel, as described in theology, a fiend. Hence, a certain reason to deprecate a lower double, immersed far deeper in matter than its original. But there is still as little cause to regard them as devils, and this is precisely what the Roman Catholics maintain against all logic and reason. The concluding sentence of this sloka shows how archaic is the belief and the doctrine that man is sevenfold in his constitution. The thread of being which animates man and passes through all his personalities, or rebirths, on this earth, an allusion to Satramtama, the thread on which, moreover, all his spirits are strung, is spun from the essence of the threefold, the fourfold, and the fivefold, which contain all of the preceding. Pankasika, agreeably to Bhagavata Purana, is one of the 7 Kumaras who go to Savita Dvipa to worship Vishnu. We shall see further on what connection there is between the celibate and chaste sons of Brahma, who refuse to multiply, and terrestrial mortals. Meanwhile, it is evident that the man-plant, Saptaparna, thus refers to the 7 principles, and man is compared to the 7-leafed plant of this name, so sacred among the Buddhists. And there is a footnote. The Egyptian allegory in the Book of the Dead already mentioned, the hymn that relates to the reward of the soul, is suggestive of our septenary doctrine as it is poetical. The deceased is allotted a piece of land in the field of Anru, wherein the manes, the deified shades of the dead, glean as the harvest they have sown in their actions in life. The corn, 7 cubits high, which grows in a territory divided into 14 and 7 portions. This corn is the food on which they live and prosper, or that will kill them, in Amenti, the realm of which the Anru field is a domain. For, as said in the hymn, the deceased is either destroyed therein or becomes pure spirit for the eternity, in consequence of the 7 times 77 lives passed, or to be passed on earth. The idea of the corn reaped as the fruit of our actions is very graphic. For further details as to Saptaparna and the importance of the number 7 in occultism as well as in symbology, the reader is referred to Part 2, Book 2 on Symbolism, sections on Saptaparna, the Septenary in the Vedas, etc., etc. Stanza 7, 4. It is the root that never dies, the 3-tongued flame of the 4 wicks. That is going to be a footnote. The 3-tongued flame of the 4 wicks corresponds to the 4 unities and the 3 binaries of the sephirothal tree. See commentary on stanza 6. The wicks are the sparks that draw from the three-tongued flame, their upper triad, shot out by the seven, their flame. The beams and sparks of one moon reflected in the running waves of all the rivers of the earth. Bhumi, or Prithvi. That is another footnote. Useless to repeat again that the terms given here are Sanskrit translations for the original terms, unknown and unheard of in Europe, would only puzzle the reader more and serve no useful purpose. The three-tongued flame that never dies is the immortal spiritual triad, the Atma Buddhi and Manas, the fruition of the latter assimilated by the first two after every terrestrial life. The four wicks that go out and are extinguished are the four lower principles, including the body. I am the three-wicked flame, and my wicks are immortal, says the defunct. I enter into the domain of Sekhem, the god whose arm sows the seed of action produced by the disembodied soul, and I enter the region of the flames who have destroyed their adversaries. An example, got rid of sin-creating four wicks. Just as milliards of bright sparks dance on the waters of an ocean above which one and the same moon is shining, so are evanescent personalities, the elusive envelopes of the immortal monad ego, twinkle and dance on the waves of Maya. They last and appear as the thousands of sparks produced by the moonbeams, only so long as the Queen of Night radiates her luster on the running waters of life, the period of a Manvantara, and then they disappear. The beams, symbols of our eternal spiritual egos, alone surviving, re-emerged in and being, as they were before, one with the Mother Source. And that is going to bring us to the end of this section. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult series of topics. I understand I have some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. It is important to remember the speculations, right? Even the things which I believe, I try to maintain as speculations. When I discuss them as if they were true, but I normally put in the beginning that it is speculation, because even though I believe that I have been divinely revealed to, that I have an understanding of things that is beyond what most people do, it is still speculation, right? Even though I have effects, right? The things that I talk about, the way that I do magic, the manipulation of the electromagnetic forces of creation, which is the Holy Spirit, I have literal physical effects that I can show. I still maintain that it's speculation, right? I believe it. I assert that it is probably true, but it is possible that it is not. That's why I tell you that there are many paths. This is a path. This path that I am outlining is a path. It has worked for me. That doesn't mean that it will for you. Some people need a different path. They have different lessons to learn. I would only be an NPC to them. To some people, this is the path they have been seeking. I am a PC to them. Where you are in your path makes a big difference. You can believe these things. I don't, most of them, right? Some of them make sense. The 7 makes sense. The 8 makes sense. The 1, the 3 makes sense. The 4, not as much. The 5, even, not as much, except as an expression of the 5th plane of existence, which we are on. It's easy to assume that you know because something is old, right? Just because something is old does not mean that it is true. Just because it has been written down for 10,000 years doesn't mean that it was true when it was written down. It just means that somebody wrote it down. Until we have a way to prove, it is always going to be speculation. My main function here is to try to separate the probable speculation from the improbable speculation. Most of the things that I differentiated out here is me doing that. And hopefully I did it well, right? Let me know if you don't agree. Right? If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that I said. As long as it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there is another work you would like to see me go through in the manner that we are doing here, drop that in the comments as well. If you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks. The bills do not pay themselves, and I don't manifest money. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pit State. Peace.